Have you ever sat quietly at the end of the day, the candles still unlit, the phone silent, and thought, so they forgot again? It's not about the cake, or the gifts, or even the exact words. It's that quiet ache, the one that whispers, did they really forget me? And if you're anything like many of us over 60, it's not the first time. One year it was an excuse, work was too hectic. The kids were sick. Another year it was just a text hours late, too short, like an afterthought. And then, one year, nothing, silence, not even a message. And somehow, that hurts more than words ever could. It happened to Madeline. She's 72 now. Every year, she'd bake her own birthday cake, set out the good china, light a candle. She'd tell herself it was just in case someone dropped by, but no one did. Her daughter used to call every year, but then the calls became texts, then the texts became emojis. And this year, there was nothing. She sat at the window for hours, watching the leaves fall, telling herself she was fine. But inside, it stung. Not because she needed a big celebration, not because she expected fanfare, but because it would have taken only 2 minutes. 2 to say, I remember you. It's easy to feel foolish for caring so much. You tell yourself not to expect anything. You act like it doesn't matter. You even joke about it, oh, they forgot again, with that practiced smile that hides the truth. But deep down, it does matter. Not the date itself, but what it represents. Being seen, being valued, being remembered. And yet, here's where it gets complicated. Because what do you say? Do you call them and scold them? Do you drop hints? Do you let it pass quietly again, stacking the silence on top of all the other silences? Let's take a breath here. Before you say anything or nothing, I want to invite you to consider something deeper. This isn't just about a birthday. It's about how easily we become invisible when the years go by. It's about how people, even the ones we raised, fed, loved, and sacrificed for, sometimes stop seeing the fullness of who we are. Not out of cruelty, but out of busyness, out of forgetfulness, out of a life that moves fast while we sit still. And sometimes, out of habit, because we've made it easy. Yes, I said that. We've made it easy to be overlooked. Easy to be forgotten, because we're so good at forgiving, at smoothing things over, at saying, it's okay when really, it's not. Take Henry, for example. He's 68. His son missed his birthday 4 years in a row. The first time, Henry called and joked about it. The second year, he said nothing. By the third, he stopped mentioning it altogether. He didn't want to make things awkward. He didn't want to sound needy. But each year, a little more of his heart closed off. And still no one noticed. We think silence is strength, that biting our tongues keeps the peace. But silence, my friend, is not peace. It's often pain in disguise. So, what do we do when they forget again? First, we start by honoring our own feelings. It's okay to admit that it hurt, that you felt left out, that a part of you waited for that phone to ring, even if you told yourself not to. You're not being dramatic. You're being honest, and that's brave. Next, and this is important, resist the urge to lash out or guilt them. That "why didn't you call me?" or "I guess I don't matter anymore" might feel justified, but it rarely lands well. It puts people on the defensive. It turns a moment of potential connection into one of shame. And shame doesn't build bridges, it burns them. Instead, try speaking from the heart without accusation. Something like, I missed hearing your voice on my birthday. I was really hoping we'd talk. Or even, I felt a little forgotten, and I needed to share that. That's not weakness. That's emotional clarity, and clarity is powerful. But let's go even further, deeper than words. Because this isn't just about getting a birthday call next year. It's about changing the way you see yourself, so others start seeing you differently too. You see, people mirror what we model. If we walk through life quietly shrinking, always accommodating, never asking, always waiting, they learn often unconsciously that we don't require much attention, that we'll always be there, no matter how little we're acknowledged. But something extraordinary happens when we begin to stand gently, firmly, in our own worth. When we stop waiting to be celebrated and start celebrating ourselves. That doesn't mean becoming hardened or cold. It doesn't mean pretending we don't care. It means taking our hearts seriously. nourishing them, honoring them, not just on birthdays, but every day. Claire, who's 66, used to spend weeks preparing for family get-togethers, only to be met with late arrivals, distracted glances, and rushed goodbyes. She felt invisible, until one year, she decided to stop hosting. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. She went to the beach that year instead, alone. She bought herself a small cake, watched the sun dip below the waves, and said to herself out loud, "Happy birthday, Claire. I see you." That evening changed everything. Not because anyone else changed, but because she did. When her children called days later, sheepish, apologetic, she didn't scold them. She told them what she did, and she told them why. And something shifted. They realized they had taken her grace for granted. They saw her again, not because she demanded it, but because she remembered herself first. So, if this year passed in silence, if your birthday came and went without a message, a call, a card, if you found yourself swallowing tears you didn't want to admit were there, take heart. You're not alone, and you are not forgotten. There's something quietly radiant about a person who no longer waits to be seen, who becomes their own witness, their own celebration. The world responds to that, maybe not immediately, maybe not with balloons and songs, but in time and presence, in respect, in eyes that finally look up and say, "There you are still here, still worthy, still allowed to want to be remembered. And it's not too late to be seen by others. Yes, but first, by yourself." There's something subtle that happens when we begin to remember ourselves, not with fanfare, but with gentleness, the kind of remembering that isn't loud or defiant, but quietly firm. That's where real change begins. But let's talk honestly for a moment, because even when you start showing up for yourself in those small ways, there's still a deeper pull inside, a habit that's been formed over years, maybe even decades, and it sounds something like this. If I just keep being nice, if I don't complain, maybe next year they'll remember. This is where we need to look at something uncomfortable but necessary. People-pleasing, not the kind that's generous or kind-hearted. That's something beautiful, but the kind that bends you out of shape just to keep the peace. The kind that says yes when your whole body wants to say no. The kind that quietly hopes your sacrifices will earn you love and yet, time and again, leaves you empty. Take Lily. She's 70 now. For years, she made herself indispensable to her family, babysitting at the last minute, driving across town for errands, saying yes to every request, even when it meant missing her own doctor's appointments. She did it all because she believed that if she just kept giving, they'd see her. That love would come in return. But love built on performance never feels safe. And every time she was forgotten, especially on her birthday, it felt like all her effort meant nothing. And here's the truth. Being endlessly accommodating doesn't bring people closer. It teaches them that your needs can wait, that your boundaries are flexible, that your time and your feelings are always second. That doesn't mean your love wasn't real. It doesn't mean you were wrong for caring so much. But it's time to ask, where did that belief begin? The one that said, if I'm easy to be around, maybe they won't leave. Or, if I don't ask for much, I'll be loved more. Often, it starts early. Childhood, young adulthood, moments where you learned that standing up for yourself led to conflict, that speaking your truth made others pull away. And so, little by little, you swallowed those truths. You learned to keep the waters calm, but calm on the surface doesn't mean peace inside. There's also something else that sneaks in with age, the fear of becoming a burden. It's a quiet fear, one that shows up in our tone, in how often we say, "Don't worry about me," or "It's okay. I understand you're busy," and it's noble, in a way not wanting to intrude, not wanting to demand, but too much of that, and we disappear entirely. Noah, 74, once said something that stayed with me. He said, "I didn't want to be the old man who always called, so I stopped calling, and then one day, I realized no one was calling me either." He had unintentionally erased himself from his children's everyday lives, not because he wasn't loved, but because he made it easy for them to forget he had needs too. That's the subtle shift we're exploring now. The difference between being low maintenance and being self-neglecting, between kindness and self-erasure. So how do we begin to change that? Not through confrontation, not by issuing ultimatums or throwing away relationships. That's not the way. The real shift starts internally, with the soft but steady voice that says, I am still here, and I matter. Abigail, 69, used to wait by the phone every birthday. She'd tell herself it didn't matter, but deep down, she'd still check the clock, still flinch when it hit midnight with no call. One year, she did something different. She wrote herself a letter, a love letter, really. She wrote about all the things she'd survived, the joy she'd brought others, the beauty of how she always showed up even when no one noticed. She cried while writing it, not out of sorrow, but relief, because for once, she was acknowledging her own heart, and something in her changed. That year, when her birthday came and went without a word from her son, she didn't spiral, she still felt it. Yes, but she didn't shrink. She read her letter instead, and later, when she spoke to her son, she didn't pretend everything was fine. She told him, with calm and kindness, I was sad not to hear from you. It reminded me how much I still long for connection. That honesty didn't push him away, it drew him closer. And that's what I want to share with you now. Your honesty grounded in love, not guilt, is powerful. It doesn't need to be dramatic or full of blame. It only needs to be true. When you begin to respect your own voice, others begin to hear it differently. Not because you've demanded anything, but because you've reclaimed something. Yourself. There's nothing selfish about that. You're not asking too much to want a phone call, to want a warm word, to want to feel remembered. You're not being needy. You're being human. And here's something I need you to hear, especially if you've spent your whole life trying not to ruffle feathers. You don't have to earn your place in someone's life. Not by baking more, giving more, forgiving more, shrinking more. You already have value. You already carry history, wisdom, grace, and light. The right people, when they pause long enough, will see it. And if they don't see it yet, you still can. You still must. So as we move deeper into this journey together, I want you to reflect on something gentle but transformative. What have you been quiet about, hoping someone else would notice? Was it your birthday? The way your heart still aches for a conversation that never came. The way you adjust your needs to avoid being too much. Whatever it is, bring it to the light. Not to shame yourself, but to see yourself again. Because when you stop hiding your heart, even just from yourself, something begins to unfold. A presence, a quiet power, a respect that starts from within and ripples outward. That's not rebellion, that's restoration. Something begins to shift the moment you stop waiting to be seen and start seeing yourself. And it's not a loud change, not one that demands attention. It's quiet, steady, like the slow return of light at dawn, gentle, but undeniable. For years, we might have confused being respected with being appreciated, with being praised, with hearing the right words at the right time. But true respect, that starts much closer to home. It begins in how we carry ourselves when no one else is looking, in how we speak about ourselves, even in silence, in how we hold our own gaze in the mirror and say, you still matter. Natalie, who's 67, used to dread her birthday. Not because she was afraid of aging, she embraced her silver hair, her laugh lines, the earned softness of time. No, it was because every year felt like a small test. Will they remember? Will they call? She'd pretend not to care, but it was a ritual of quiet disappointment. Until one year, something changed. She decided not to wait anymore. She booked herself a breakfast reservation at her favorite little cafe, wore her favorite scarf, sat by the window, and brought a novel she loved. No phones, no clock watching, just herself. And that small act, that moment of choosing herself, was the beginning of a different life. When we stop chasing respect and begin embodying it, people feel that, not because we've told them to, but because our presence becomes different. It's like a lighthouse. It doesn't run around the shore screaming at ships to notice it. It simply shines. It stands. It knows what it is. And in that steadiness, others are drawn to it. Madeline, who we talked about earlier, the one who baked her own cake. She began doing something else too. She started painting again, not professionally, not for attention, just in the quiet of her sunroom, where the light hit just right. She told me, I stopped trying to fill my days waiting for someone to call. I started filling them with things that made me feel alive again. And here's what's beautiful, her daughter, the one who used to forget, began to ask questions. Mom, what have you been up to? You sound different. The shift wasn't in confrontation. It was in radiance. This isn't magic. It's presence. When we embody joy, even a quiet, humble joy, it reminds others of our worth without us ever needing to say a word. But this takes courage. Because for many of us, we've lived decades pouring outward, giving, nurturing, carrying everyone's needs in our arms, often forgetting to hold our own. So turning inward again can feel foreign, maybe even selfish. But self-care isn't selfish. Self-abandonment is. Lucas, 71, told me once that he thought birthdays were only meant for children. What do I need a party for? He'd say. But when we unpacked it, we found something tender beneath the belief that he didn't deserve celebration unless someone else offered it first. So he stopped expecting, and with it, stopped honoring himself. And that's the piece I want to gently invite you to reclaim. The right to honor yourself, even if no one else does. Because when you do, something curious happens. People start responding to that energy. They notice the shift, not always consciously, but deeply. The person who once waited quietly for a call now speaks with a lighter voice. The person who used to cancel their own plans to be available now has a full calendar. And suddenly, the ones who once overlooked you feel that difference. They sense the dignity, the boundaries, the light. Owen, 65, used to end every phone call with his son by saying, "Don't worry about me. I'm fine." Even when he wasn't, even when the days felt hollow. One day, he decided to try something different. He ended the call with, "I'd really love to talk again soon. I miss hearing from you." It was said with calm, with love, not desperation. And his son paused. "Me too, Dad. Let's plan something." It was a small ripple, but it grew. That's what dignity sounds like, not silence, not guilt-tripping, not waiting with hidden resentment, but honest, open-hearted truth, rooted in your own value. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. You've already lived through so much. The quiet victories, the private heartbreaks, the invisible strength it takes to wake up every day and still care, still hope, still love. That is sacred. That is enough. And here's something beautiful. When we begin to center ourselves in our own story again, we don't lose our relationships. We often improve them because we're no longer showing up from a place of emptiness, hoping someone else will fill the void. We're showing up full, not perfect, not always cheerful, but whole, honest, real. Nathan, 68, took up photography again after retiring. At first, it was just to pass the time, but eventually, he started posting a few pictures online: landscapes, street corners, birds at sunrise. Nothing fancy, but they carried his perspective, his quiet way of seeing beauty. His grandson, who'd barely visited in years, saw the photos and sent him a message. "Grandpa, these are incredible. Will you teach me how to take pictures like that?" That's how the reconnection started, not through pressure, but through presence. So if this is the year they forgot, if you're still carrying that ache in your chest, let it be the last year you forget yourself. Stand a little taller, speak a little clearer, take yourself out for a walk, a coffee, a quiet moment of celebration. You don't have to wait for someone else to light your candle. You can light it yourself. And when they do reach out, whether next week or next year, meet them not with bitterness, but with clarity. Let your tone carry warmth, but also truth. Let your presence remind them, "I'm still here, and I am not invisible." You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. That's how we restore what's been chipped away, not by begging, not by hardening, but by returning to ourselves, by showing the world and our children what self-respect looks like after 60. And sometimes, just sometimes, when they see it, they begin to remember. Thank you for being here, really being here. If you're still with me, it means this message touched something tender in you. Maybe a memory, maybe a longing, maybe a quiet truth you've carried for a long time and didn't know how to say out loud. And I want you to know, I see you, not as a forgotten voice, not as someone whose best years are behind them, but as a soul with a deep well of wisdom, love, and presence, someone who still deserves to be seen, heard, and cherished. If this year, your birthday passed quietly, unnoticed, unspoken, I want to say something that maybe no one else did. Happy birthday, truly. Not just for the day itself, but for everything you've lived through, for the way you kept showing up, for the love you gave that was never returned the same way, for the dinners you cooked and the tears you hid, for the strength you found when others didn't see how hard it was to carry so much. Your life is a story that matters, not because anyone else says so, but because it is yours, and it is worthy. I don't know what this year has brought you. Maybe you're walking through loss. Maybe you're learning to be alone for the first time in decades. Maybe you're surrounded by people but still feel like no one truly sees you. Wherever you are on your journey, I want you to take one thing with you. You're allowed to be the center of your own life again. You don't need permission to love yourself well. You don't need to keep shrinking so others are more comfortable. You don't need to silence your needs to avoid rocking the boat. You are allowed right now to honor your heart, your voice, your light, and you're not alone in this. There are so many others, maybe even reading these words right now, who know exactly how it feels, who have sat in that same silence, who have wondered, did I do something wrong? When the phone never rang. To you, I say this, you didn't do anything wrong. Love doesn't always look the way we want it to, and sometimes people forget, not because you don't matter, but because they haven't yet learned how to see beyond themselves. That's not an excuse, but it is a truth, one that can help you release the weight of personal blame. You are not hard to love. You are simply learning how to love yourself without conditions. And maybe, just maybe, as you do, others will begin to follow your lead. Not because you demanded it, but because your light becomes impossible to ignore. If this message made you feel seen, I'd love for us to stay connected. This space, this channel isn't just about advice or tips. It's about creating a quiet home for voices that are so often left out. A place where you don't have to explain why something hurt. A place where you don't have to justify your needs. A place where you are already enough, just as you are. If that feels like something you want more of in your life, I invite you gently and with care to click that subscribe button. Not because numbers matter, but because connection does. And I'd be honored to keep walking this journey with you. And if you feel moved to, I'd love to hear your story. Truly, has your relationship with your children changed over time? Have you had a birthday that was forgotten or remembered in a way that surprised you? What helped you cope? What did you learn? Your words might be the ones that help someone else feel less alone tonight. So share them, if you can, in the comments, or even just in a journal for yourself. Your voice deserves space. And if no one's told you lately, let me be the one. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are still becoming, still radiant, still worthy of celebration. The world may have gotten noisier, faster, more distracted, but that doesn't diminish the quiet beauty of who you are. So the next time a birthday comes and goes, whether you hear from anyone or not, I hope you light your own candle. I hope you say your own name with love. I hope you celebrate yourself not as a fallback plan, but as a sacred choice, because you, dear heart, are worth remembering. Every day, especially by you.